The world seemed to pause as a solemn Prince William and a visibly shaken Princess Catherine appeared before the cameras, their trembling voices carrying a truth no one was prepared to hear. What they revealed shattered royal protocol, stunned advisors, and sent the public into a spiral of grief and speculation, signaling that this was no routine announcement, but the beginning of something far more devastating. This moment did not emerge from rumors or leaks. It was born from silence, the heavy, deliberate kind that feels impossible to ignore. When William and Catherine finally stepped forward, it was not with confidence or ceremony, but with unmistakable grief. For a family trained to maintain composure through every storm, this was different. William's face bore the strain of someone who had practiced the words, but could not contain the emotion behind them, his voice cracking not as a prince, but as a husband and father struggling to stand. Catherine, visibly exhausted, looked as though she had been holding herself together for days, her posture forced into strength while her eyes revealed a deeper, haunting pain, as if she had fought to protect a truth and finally lost. The moment that chilled the nation came when they confirmed this was not a minor update, not a temporary setback, and not a request for privacy. It was personal, devastating, and struck at the very heart of their family. Even before details were shared, their emotions spoke louder than any statement, revealing a grief that would not fade once the cameras stopped rolling. What shocked the public was not only the announcement itself, but the urgency behind it, because the monarchy does not move swiftly unless something is already unraveling behind palace walls. This was not a planned royal appearance. It was crisis management wrapped in dignity, and everyone could feel it. Within moments, the world erupted as newsrooms scrambled and social media flooded with disbelief, theories spreading faster than the official words could settle. The pauses, the swallowed breaths, and the way William stared ahead as if clinging to stability, while Catherine held on as though letting go meant losing everything, made the silence between their words even louder. Inside the palace, the family had already been briefed, as if the institution had finally accepted that concealment was no longer possible. Outside the gates, the public was left with a single burning question. What tragedy could force the future king and queen to stand before the world looking as though their lives had just collapsed? And why did it feel like this was only the beginning of the truth? Something far deeper still seemed locked behind palace doors, waiting to explode. Because as shocking as the announcement was, it never felt like the full story, only the first crack in something much larger the monarchy had been desperately trying to hold together. Beneath the composed faces and carefully rehearsed lines lay a darker truth, a secret long buried and now threatening to shake the institution to its core. While the public saw only to grieving royals, insiders knew the pain had begun months earlier, with whispers echoing through palace corridors, silent medical visits, coded entries in official diaries, and unexplained absences that now demanded a second look. Catherine's disappearance from the spotlight, once brushed off as exhaustion or scheduling conflicts, suddenly carried a chilling weight, marked by quiet cancellations, unusual delays, and that haunting moment when William attended a major event alone, his smile strained and his words noticeably brief. Behind closed doors, a silent battle had been unfolding, as Catherine's health reportedly became one of the most closely guarded secrets within the palace, known only to a handful of senior aides, determined to maintain control. The royal household tightened confidentiality, binding staff with strict NDA letters and shielding any sign of vulnerability. But even the strongest walls eventually crack. Leaked communications between palace doctors and senior staff hinted at a sensitive and worsening condition, vague in detail yet unmistakable in meaning something was seriously wrong. And the institution was scrambling to contain it. The pressure of sustaining appearances grew unbearable as William, known for his unwavering sense of duty, quietly withdrew from key engagements, including critical Commonwealth meetings that raised private concern but little public challenge. In hindsight, those absences were not about protocol, but survival. What haunted insiders most was not only the medical crisis, but the emotional toll rippling through Kensington, where even the children were affected. Prince George reportedly breaking down during a private school moment, staff noting increased counseling visits, and the youngest asking questions no parent is prepared to answer. The burden on William and Catherine was no longer just royal, but profoundly parental, forcing them into an impossible choice: protect the illusion of strength through silence, or speak out and risk shattering the image the monarchy had spent decades preserving. In the end, the announcement was not merely a statement, it was a fracture in the royal facade. A cry for relief from a pressure that could no longer be contained. They had become trapped in a choice born not of duty, but of love. And when that decision was finally made, it caught the institution completely off guard. Inside the palace, however, the damage had already begun. Trust eroded, panic spread, and the carefully controlled narrative slipped beyond reach. As speculation intensified, it became clear that the next revelation would pierce royal silence and strike at the very heart of the monarchy's struggle with truth. Duty demanded restraint, but love demanded honesty. And behind palace walls, William and Catherine faced their ultimate test, not as future monarchs, but as parents. What followed was not merely a royal confession, but a deeply human plea that cut through centuries of tradition. In the weeks after the announcement, while the public tried to assemble fragments of the story, the couple wrestled with a far more complex reality, debating and even clashing over whether silence was still worth the cost. That burden was no longer theirs alone, it was crushing their children as well. Every option carried consequences. To speak risked destabilizing the crown's image, but to remain silent meant suffocating beneath a carefully maintained illusion. Catherine, torn between maternal instinct and royal responsibility, began to unravel, finding no scripted answer that could comfort George when he asked why the world wasn't being told the truth, and no protocol that could bring her peace at night. Behind the scenes, tensions flared as Queen Camilla, fiercely protective of tradition and image, reportedly insisted the matter remain private, viewing truth as a doorway to chaos, while Catherine saw it as a lifeline. Amid the turmoil, an unexpected ally emerged in Princess Anne, whose no-nonsense resolve cut through ceremony as she quietly became Catherine's strongest advocate. reminding her that she was raising human beings, not just heirs. King Charles attempted to balance both sides, favoring a controlled, carefully timed disclosure crafted by palace strategists. But William and Catherine refused to wait any longer. What ultimately tipped the scale was not pressure or strategy, but a forgotten letter and envelope left behind by Diana, written during her own struggle between monarchy and motherhood. Its words were simple yet devastating. If fear ever silences you, remember that your children's truth is louder. The message ignited Catherine's resolve and hardened William's determination, leading them to speak out not because it was safe, but because it was right. While the palace hurried to frame the moment as part of a broader communications plan, insiders knew the truth. This was no orchestration, but a deliberate breakaway from a system that prized secrecy over healing. Yet just as the dust began to settle, a shocking document surfaced, reframing everything. Hidden within a confidential archive labeled Sovereign Contingency, a sealed report never intended for public eyes emerged. Its contents not only personal, but constitutional in scope, leaked by someone deep inside who had reached their breaking point. The document, marked with the royal cipher and titled Succession Risk Report, Heir Viability, and Long-Term Stability, revealed coded references to a medical evaluation not of King Charles or William, but of someone far younger. A discovery that sent shockwaves through the very foundations of the monarchy. The language of the document was cautious, cloaked in bureaucratic phrasing about developmental anomalies, anticipated psychological burdens, and future public-facing limitations. But beneath the clinical wording, one name surfaced again and again: Louis. Prince Louis, long portrayed as the cheerful wild card of William and Catherine's children, appeared in the file not as a symbol of light-hearted charm, but as the subject of deeply sensitive internal assessments. According to the report, advisors feared that, if the traditional line of succession remained unchanged, long-term implications could arise that might erode public confidence in royal stability. For weeks, possibly months, senior royals had reportedly convened behind closed doors to confront questions once considered unthinkable. What if Louis could not fulfill royal duties in the future? What if efforts to manage his public image failed? And what if the crown was ultimately forced to consider quietly bypassing a rightful heir? Whispers suggested contingency plans were already drafted, including adjustments to titles and a potential reshuffling of succession, under ceremonial justification, all kept from the public to avoid triggering a constitutional crisis. Against that backdrop, William and Catherine's announcement, raw, immediate, and uncoordinated with palace strategy, suddenly took on new meaning. What had initially seemed like an emotional plea now looked, to some within the institution, like a preemptive strike, an act of defiance against a system that had begun planning their child's future without their consent. The leak altered everything. Public sympathy quickly gave way to suspicion, as questions mounted over whether the tragedy was being met with compassion or managed as damage control. With the sealed file exposed, the monarchy's grip on its narrative collapsed, transforming a private family crisis into an existential threat to the institution itself. As pressure intensified, the Crown was forced to act swiftly, culminating in an extraordinary royal summit held under the cover of darkness at Balmoral. No cameras, no press, only the monarchy's most powerful figures gathered with the weight of centuries pressing down on a single question: how to protect the Crown without sacrificing the truth. The urgency was unmistakable. The meeting was convened less than 48 hours after the leak, at a moment when control of the narrative was rapidly slipping away. Control was already slipping as each rival at Balmoral was staggered under strict confidentiality. Charles, Anne, Edward, and Camilla, for figures carrying vastly different interpretations of loyalty, crisis, and control. The estate, once a refuge, felt heavy with consequence. Catherine was conspicuously absent, not because she was excluded, but because she refused to attend, making her position unmistakably clear. Her place was with her children, not in a room where their future would be debated like a chess move. Her absence spoke louder than any speech, signaling she would not negotiate her child's humanity. Inside, tensions ignited immediately. William, exhausted and emotionally raw, entered not as a prince, but as a father pushed beyond endurance, confronting his father directly and demanding an end to the palace's calculated silence. The clash was not political, but deeply personal, driven by a son who felt abandoned by the very institution he was born to protect. Charles, torn between duty and love, urged restraint, arguing that every decision carried consequences that would echo through history. But William wanted no echoes, only honesty. As the night wore on, legal teams were summoned and emergency succession addendums quietly laid on the table, outlining contingencies that included bypassing heirs under special circumstances. There it was in ink and clauses. The Crown preparing for the possibility of skipping Louis without public consent. Camilla, steadfast in her role as guardian of the monarchy's image, reportedly insisted sentiment could not be allowed to rewrite structure, while others in the room hesitated, recognizing this was no longer about tradition alone, but about protecting people. Then Anne spoke, cutting through protocol with devastating clarity. Let's not repeat Diana's fate. The room fell silent. Her words a warning forged from history's punishment of silence, disguised as strength. Lines were drawn, trust fractured, and the summit revealed a brutal truth: the institution was not only under pressure from outside forces, but collapsing beneath the weight of its own secrecy. Beyond palace walls, the public mood shifted rapidly. As grief hardened into anger and loyalty turned to doubt, petitions surged, protests erupted, and William and Catherine became unexpected symbols of defiance. What began as quiet vigils outside Kensington Palace, flowers, notes, photographs swelled into mass demonstrations, chants echoing through Buckingham and Balmoral as crowds demanded accountability. Not ceremony, journalists, public figures, and even members of Parliament joined the call, praising the couple's humanity and condemning the silence. For the first time in decades, the monarchy stood not at the center of reverence, but under relentless scrutiny. Social media erupted with fury, hashtags demanding transparency dominating global trends. Every royal post overwhelmed with calls for truth. And then the footage surfaced, a leaked 20-second video of Princess Charlotte sobbing in a school hallway, surrounded by aides, her distress unmistakably real. That brief moment shattered hearts across the nation. Because suddenly this was no longer about royal roles or succession. It was about children caught in the machinery of an institution that had waited too long to speak. With children now visibly caught in the storm, the crisis transformed into something far greater than a royal scandal. It became a movement. Grassroots organizers began mobilizing not just for transparency, but for transformation, calling for a reimagined monarchy free from the old rules of silence, secrecy, and sacrifice. At the center of this growing momentum stood William, not by ambition, but by necessity. As whispers grew louder questioning whether King Charles could retain moral authority after such a profound collapse of trust, the idea of William stepping forward sooner framed not as rebellion, but renewal was no longer fringe. Polls shifted sharply, public confidence in Charles plummeted, and for the first time, the royal family was no longer facing quiet dissent behind palace walls, but millions of voices unified by outrage. Pressure mounted from every screen and street, demanding evolution or irrelevance. Then came the letter, long believed lost, a handwritten note from Diana, Princess of Wales, emerged from a locked box held by her former legal advisor, dated just 2 weeks before her death. Its timing was chilling, arriving as the monarchy hovered on the brink of moral collapse. This was not a public statement or a memoir, but a private, intimate message, a mother's fears preserved in ink for a moment. Like this, the letter was brief, yet devastating, containing a line that quickly went viral. If truth ever brings my boys to tears, let them lead with it. The words landed like a thunderclap, offering permission, blessing, and prophecy all at once, seemingly answering every question surrounding William's decision to break tradition and speak openly. Handwriting experts confirmed its authenticity, and public sentiment shifted instantly. Outrage softened into reverence, doubt into clarity, as Diana was thrust back into the heart of a modern royal reckoning. An unguarded photograph soon followed, capturing William alone in his garden, hands trembling as he held the letter, not for cameras, but for strength. The image spread worldwide, becoming a symbol of generational defiance, a prince refusing to inherit silence. Inside the palace, the letter shattered the last illusion of control. Charles reportedly wept in private upon reading it, struck not only by Diana's words, but by the human cost of a system he had long tried to contain. Camilla, by contrast, was said to dismiss it as a distraction. Yet even her closest allies sensed the shift was irreversible. The court of public opinion had turned permanently, reopening wounds the monarchy never healed and exposing them in real time before the world. Attempts to contain the fallout, drafted statements, consulted historians, fell flat. Because this was no longer a public relations crisis, but a spiritual reckoning. The people had chosen their side, aligning not with the crown, but with the legacy of a woman they believed always told the truth, even when it hurt. For William, the letter became a compass, a final whisper from the mother he lost too soon, urging him to stop surviving within the system and start challenging it. And with history Echoing louder than ever, he made a move no one, especially Charles, expected. In a closed-door meeting with senior royals, William issued a stark ultimatum: the monarchy must change, or he would walk away with Catherine and their children. The crown had always thrived on silence, but William had tasted the power of truth, and he was not turning back. The protests, the mounting pressure, and Diana's haunting letter had pushed everything to the brink. But nothing prepared the palace for William's next move. He arrived at the emergency, gathering not to be heard, but to draw a line the crown could no longer cross. There would be no more whispered negotiations and no more half-truths, he said, laying out demands that shook the room: full transparency in future royal health matters, a public acknowledgement of the harm caused by institutional silence, and a formal review of succession protocols to ensure no child would ever again be sacrificed for image. The already fractured room erupted. Camilla reportedly rose first, accusing William of endangering the monarchy by letting emotion override stability, her controlled voice cracking with fury. But William did not respond. His silence carried more weight than any rebuttal. Charles, torn between his role as sovereign and father, pleaded for time, for gradual change. But William refused, knowing time had already exacted its cost on Catherine, on their children, and on the legacy Diana had warned him about. Then came a turning point when Princess Anne voiced her unequivocal support, declaring the system unsustainable if it continued to punish honesty and reward suppression. Her words shifting the balance of the room. Though Catherine was absent, her presence was unmistakable. Sources say she helped shape the words William would soon deliver. Every sentence forged from shared pain rather than palace scripting. His ultimatum was not about stepping back quietly, but about redefining the monarchy itself, one rooted in empathy, honesty, and protection rather than preservation at all costs. When William walked out, it was with finality, not anger, signaling a future king who had outgrown the rules written by fear. Soon after, standing beneath the Union Jack, William addressed the world not as a prince, but as a father, speaking with raw honesty about sleepless nights, Catherine's breaking point, and children forced to smile while their family unraveled. Behind palace walls, he spoke of Louis not as a title, but as a child whose health had become the subject of contingency plans, and of George and Charlotte bearing a burden they never chose. Then came the declaration: William and Catherine would temporarily step back from royal duties, not in rebellion, but in reprioritization, because no title, no legacy, was worth more than their children's well-being. What followed was not resignation, but a manifesto, a vision of a monarchy that placed humanity above hierarchy and truth above tradition. As Catherine stood beside him, hand in hand with their son, the image needed no staging. It was a family reclaiming its voice. The response was immediate and overwhelming, with global praise for the courage and candor that made the royal family feel human again. Inside the palace, resistance remained, but something irreversible had shifted. The silence that once ruled its halls had thinned, and the institution had been forced to listen. William did not speak to preserve tradition, he spoke to save his family, and in doing so, He may have opened the door to a monarchy that heals instead of hides. Even as the cost of silence continued to echo long after the applause faded.